Hey, it's Chris from the Droning Company, and today we're going to be reviewing the Autel EVO Nano Plus combo by Autel Robotics. So Autel contacted me about a month ago asking me if I would review the Nano Plus combo. And of course, I love Autel and I love their products, so I was more than excited to review this drone. I haven't had a mini drone in quite some time, so I was really excited to actually get the chance to fly something of this size and weight class again. Now, the first thing I noticed when I pulled it out of the box was the arms, and that's not for a good reason. Compared to the rest of the drone, the plastic on the arms just feels flimsy and weak, and like at any moment, it could just fold in, or it might break really easily on just even the most minor impacts or landings. It's hard to explain without allowing you to feel the plastic on the arms, but it feels like they cut maybe some corners in terms of spending or in weight overall, because this is a sub 250 gram drone, and that might have been their opportunity to take off some of the weight on the drone and keep it under 250 grams. Other than that though, I have no complaints about the build quality on this drone. Feels like everything else on this drone is really high quality. We've got nice little obstacle avoidance sensors here on the front with some really sturdy plastic packaging around the outside of those to protect those. The camera and gimbal assembly feel very strong, and the body of the drone itself, including the casing on the batteries, just feels sturdy, solid, and something that won't break very easily. Of course, again, this is a drone that does not have any type of propeller guard built into it. It's a mini drone, a consumer drone, so it can really only handle so much damage anyway, and that goes for all drones really. But this guy definitely is a little bit more on the delicate side compared to bigger drones, but that's to be expected with a smaller drone. Overall though, build quality on this, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. That brings us to the controller. Now, I really like the controller for the EVO Nano Plus, and this goes with a variety of different drones from Autel as well. So this is sort of their standard RC, and I used this RC before, not maybe this particular one, but this model before in our review of the EVO Lite Plus, and I get to use it again for the Nano Plus. And my opinion largely hasn't changed for this controller. It does have a really nice ergonomic feel, and being a former and still current gamer, it has a video game controller-like feel to it. When I hold it in my hand, it feels very natural, which is great because it puts me in a comfort zone when flying, which is super important, especially for beginners. You want your beginner pilots to feel comfortable and relaxed behind the controls, because that influences how their flight goes once the drone is in the air. Really solidly built controller too. It's got rubberized grips on the bottom, and it just has a nice weight to it. I feel like, not that I'm encouraging you to do this if you get this, I could drop this on the ground and it would take quite the beating. So it's a very rugged little piece of machinery. The buttons have a nice feel to it. The joysticks, or the little cylinders where the joysticks sit, feel very sturdy and solid. The buttons have a nice feel, like I said. Even the wheel to control the gimbal has a nice feedback to it. Really solid user interface with the controller, and the build quality of the controller is nice too. My two big complaints on this controller and where this lost points were A, in the little joystick screws. Screwing these in seems like a nightmare, and I did it pretty easily there, but believe me, when I first got this controller, not so easy. They seem to stick halfway through when you thread them down into the hole, and sometimes it takes a while to turn them in there because it's just not catching the thread the way that it needs to. That could really cost you time if it is a time-sensitive shot. You need to get the drone in the air sooner rather than later, and you don't really want to be screwing around with the joysticks. And with the carrying case they come with, the controller doesn't fit in the case with the joysticks screwed in. You actually have to unscrew them every single time you put it in the stock carrying case with the Plus combo. The other complaint that I had has to do with, again, inserting something into the controller to make it work, and it's putting the cable that goes to your device that you're using to view the camera feed into the slot here. You plug it in just like that. It's USB-C, and this looks fine, but I'll tell you where the problem is. It does not have any give when it comes to closing this part, the slat where the device goes in. This device holder, if you forget or are not paying attention, and this is plugged in there and you slam this down, you could damage the cable, which means you have to buy a new one, or you have to use a different one. And I'm gonna tell you, for some reason, whatever reason that is, I have tons of USB-C cables, but they don't really work all that well in this application. It's like there's not enough room between the place where the device holder is and the port for the USB-C cable. It's really frustrating, and it's something that I didn't think would be a big deal when I first ran into the problem, but after about 5 or 6 flights with this thing, I really started to get annoyed by this cable and where that port was placed. So, for that reason, the controller gets an 8 out of 10. The user interface for the drone itself, and I'm considering that anything that has to do with the operation of the drone through the Autel Sky app, was pretty solid, pretty smooth overall. The app itself, which is called Autel Sky, just has a really nice ease of use. It's laid out pretty well in terms of the start screen and getting into the actual application to fly your drone, and it runs pretty smoothly as well. I didn't have a lot of issues in terms of responsiveness with the app. When I'd tap on something, it would respond almost immediately every single time. I also really enjoyed how quickly everything linked up. By the time I had my phone plugged in to the controller, the drone on, the controller on, and the Autel Sky pulled up, everything was ready to go. I mean, it took me literally maybe 15 seconds to get everything in place and ready to fly. That's not counting taking all of the protective features on the drone off. That's the gimbal cover and the actual strap that goes around the arms to keep everything in place while in the case. So about 15 seconds once I have all that stuff off, between turning the drone on, the controller on, and getting the app pulled up. Everything was connected. Really, really smooth. In terms of the use of the app during flight, I really enjoyed how quickly you could go up into your photo and video album and preview the files that you were shooting. It was very easy. There's just a little icon right on the screen that you can tap, and it pulls everything up that you've shot to that point so that you can preview it even during flight. I also liked how easy it was to switch between intelligent flight modes as well as standard flight modes such as smooth, standard, and ludicrous. It was just very quick, very easy, made the interface with the app itself very, very enjoyable. What I didn't like was actually manipulating the camera settings in the app. The menus to do this are sort of a mess, and it's not easy to use the sliders to influence what values you want on your camera settings, and half the time they're a little bit buggy and they don't keep, so they don't stay where you want them to stay. They'll kick back to their default value out of the auto settings. So if you're using this in the pro mode as opposed to the auto mode, be prepared for some growing pains when it comes to setting the camera settings the way that you want them. I did find after a few flights I got a little bit better at it, learning the nuance of how to use those sliders and set the camera settings the way I wanted to, but the fact remains, it's not the most convenient process in the world. Once again, when it comes to user interface, the Autel EVO Nano Plus earns an 8 out of 10. I was really impressed by the flight characteristics of this drone, especially considering it is a mini style drone. It handles spectacularly, and it's a rock solid flight too. I have zero confidence issues when it comes to flying this drone through airspace. I know it's gonna do exactly what I need it to do. It's gonna be able to fight through some pretty adverse wind conditions. Now, I never really got it out in wind over 20 miles an hour because I think once you start to push your luck there, that's a little bit more difficult. But anything up to 20 miles an hour, I had flown this thing in, and I gotta tell you, I was impressed at how it handled it. Now, there were some really strong gusts that kept this from going forward or backward or whatever direction I wanted it to go, so I had a hard time fighting the really, really strong stuff. But if it was just a consistent breeze between 15 and 20 miles an hour, this handled it with little to no issue, and that was super impressive for me. Where I saw a little bit of a negative with this drone actually has to do with position hold. Now, it does hold position. It is a satellite drone and it uses GPS to hold its position, and it does that fairly well. Where I was concerned with this was actually its ability to hold a tighter space in the airspace. This had a margin of error, I would say roughly between 5 and 10 feet in extreme circumstances. And when you're flying in tight airspace, something that's got a lot of traffic around it or other aircraft in it, you can't really have that big of a margin of error. 5 to 10 feet, that's pretty tough to mitigate, especially when you're flying a little bit further away from the starting point. Overall though, really, really impressed by the flight characteristics of this drone, so let's give it an 8 out of 10. Now let's talk about one of the questions that's important to a lot of drone pilots looking to buy a new drone. What's the flight time on this thing? Well, Autel markets the Nano Plus at 28 minutes of flight time. Now, you need to remember, this isn't just Autel, this is every drone manufacturer. They will always tell you the flight time based upon perfect conditions. That means no wind, that means no interference, it means just perfect overall conditions, temperature-wise, everything that goes into the lifespan of a battery while in use. So, that being said, they might say 28 minutes, but don't ever expect to actually get 28 minutes out of your battery. Overall, through 15 to 20 flights, I got about 24 minutes, give or take, depending upon the conditions from the batteries, which is still really impressive. The fact that they were able to be within 4 minutes of their marketed time, that's good. That's a solid flight time overall. And for a mini drone, you can't hate that flight time either. Now, that being said, there are some similar products out on the market that do better in flight time, and I'm not just talking marginally, I'm talking significantly better. I was a little disappointed that there wasn't more battery power brought to this drone. I feel if they were able to create a pro battery that could maybe get 35 minutes of flight time out of it, I'd be super happy with the flight time, even if I had to pay a little bit more for an upgraded battery. I just don't think 28 minutes quite cuts it anymore, especially since the market on that is developing so quickly. Those longer flight times are going to be more and more important as the technology develops. So definitely not super pleased with the battery time on this, but I'm also not going to dock it a ton of points because 24 minutes is still a pretty solid flight time. For that reason, the Autel Nano Plus gets an 8 out of 10 in flight time. Now let's talk about the cons on this camera first, because I want to get those out of the way so that we can finish with a really positive note on this camera, because I think overall it deserves that positive note, but I can't ignore the negatives that I saw when using the camera. First and foremost, and this has been a complaint I've had about Autel systems in the past, I have a lot of love for Autel, but the truth remains the camera quality on this thing is good, but it's way too sharp right out of the box. I will not get off of that hill. I will die on that hill. That's where you can find me when it comes to all things Autel. I love the drones. I love the quality on the images that come out of the camera overall, but man, you've got to back off the sharpness. It is like so sharp that you get sharpness related noise in every photo and especially video that you shoot with this thing unless you scale the sharpness back. Now the good news is, even though it is uber sharp on this camera, you can easily mitigate that by adjusting the camera settings. You can knock back the sharpness on the image in the Autel Sky app for the drone itself, or if you forget to do that or you don't know how to do that and you just start flying, you can always do it in post-production. Premiere, Resolve, all of the video editors have the ability to knock back some of the sharpness on the video you're working with. But still, stock image quality, the sharpness is just a little bit too much for my liking. Some people prefer it that way, but I think it's too sharp no matter how much you like sharpness on your pictures and videos. Another con that I saw here was a color bleed, which that could just be isolated to this drone. It could be something that's a defect in the drone, or maybe the drone doesn't have updated firmware, although I did update the firmware before I actually flew it, so I don't think that's the problem. But I did have a slight color bleed, especially in the photos that I shot, and it seemed to lean either towards green or magenta. It was one of those two colors, and there was really nothing I could do to fix it. I tried masking some things and just counterbalancing the magenta with some green or the green with some magenta, but it was just too far spread of a problem, and it took a few images that would have otherwise been really well constructed, well exposed images and essentially ruined them. The other thing I saw was a potential dead pixel issue, which would absolutely be unique to this drone, but it's something to note. Maybe this does have a tendency to have pixels die earlier, but there were a few pictures that I took in the city of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I had the same spot turn 3 different colors in 3 different photos. It went from green to magenta to white. And I'm not totally sure. I didn't mess with the camera settings all that much through the 3 photos that I took. Might have adjusted the shutter speed, might have adjusted the ISO, but other than that, it really wasn't that much, and the adjustments I did make were minimal, to say the least. And again, I cannot stress this enough. I don't over edit my photos. In fact, some people say I don't edit my photos enough when it comes to color grading. That may be true, but the point is I'm not over sharpening, I'm not over saturating, I'm not over vibrancing these photos. Vibrancing, is that a word? I'm not doing any of that too much to too large of a scale. So there's something going on with the actual processing of the imagery in this drone that's causing those problems. I don't know what it is, but that's just the experience that I had. And it's something you should be paying attention to too if you're considering buying the Autel EVO Nano Plus. Now, I don't want to be all doom and gloom about the camera because overall, other than those issues that I did face with the drone from time to time, I had a great time getting images and videos with this camera. The overall quality is fantastic. 4K, absolutely true to form. Absolutely fantastic performance when it comes to producing images that could be used in a social media profile, images that could be used for a hobbyist or a recreational flyer. And heck, this camera, while I wouldn't make it my main workhorse, could certainly fill in as an emergency backup and do a good enough job that you could present work to clients. I wouldn't say, again, that I do it all the time, but if you were in a pinch, this would absolutely do the job and serve as a very nice professional tool as a backup. The other thing I really want to mention about this is we talked about the sensor size. Not an overly large sensor, but that could be expected on a mini drone. But low light conditions, this thing was a rock star. When I had the camera set at 1600 ISO and a 1/10 shutter speed, it performed absolutely incredibly. In fact, I was sort of blown away when I was editing the photos and videos at how great the low light quality was on this drone. If you want to fly as a hobbyist or as an amateur photographer and use this drone in low light, I don't think you'll have a lot of issues. Again, it's going to take some jigging with the actual settings. You're going to have to make some changes and make sure that they're set appropriately. But if you can find and strike that perfect balance on your camera settings, this thing will perform in low light and it will do it better than you've ever expected. So huge ups in the low light performance department for this camera. It was one of the biggest surprises when reviewing this drone, and it was not to be understated. So considering everything I've been through with this drone in terms of camera performance, I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. The last category that I touch on in these reviews is the other/intangibles category. Now, this covers all of the things that aren't major concerns, but I wanted to give some recognition to when it comes to flying this drone. That includes pros and cons. So let's go ahead and start out with the pros, what I liked in terms of intangibles about this drone. First, I gotta mention the intelligent flight modes. Absolutely so much fun. I don't typically fly with intelligent flight modes or automated flight modes. I do all of my work manually, but I couldn't help but find myself go back to the intelligent flight modes on this drone over and over and over again. My favorite intelligent flight mode though has to be Flick. Now, it's sort of a unique thing, and that's why I think I like it so much, is there's no other drone on the market other than the Autel products that have this particular function in terms of intelligent flight modes, but it's just such a neat shot. And it makes for such a cool image. It's very unique, and that's what I like so much about it, is that there's nothing else really like it on the market. Aside from that, all of the other intelligent flight modes are absolutely fantastic. Again, I had a ton of fun flying with this drone and flying with the intelligent flight modes. It really brought out the inner kid in me, and I found myself laughing sometimes just out of pure enjoyment while using some of these intelligent flight modes and seeing what this drone was capable of. The other thing I really liked about this drone was the panorama images. Now, panoramas are something that are really strong when it comes to drone technology. I mean, you talk about a panorama with a regular camera, and yeah, you get a pretty cool view, especially if you're at a high vantage point. But with a drone, I can get to the highest vantage point and get the coolest and widest perspective that I possibly can. And there was no exception to the rule on that with the Nano Plus. It took awesome panoramas and it actually merged them together in the software itself. Just some quick mentions here too. It's got obstacle avoidance, which is great for beginners. It has an awesome carrying case, which I'm gonna pull up right here, right now. Just a very cool little carrying case, and everything fits really nicely into the bag. Now let's talk about some of the cons. First and foremost has to do with the protective equipment when in storage and transportation. The gimbal cover going onto this camera was a nightmare. I hated every second of it, and that is the one place that I'll be super critical of this drone, is this gimbal cover is absolutely horrendous when it comes to fitting on the camera and snapping into place. The other part of this that I really hated was this guy right here. Now, this definitely wasn't as bad as the gimbal cover, but I put it in the same breath because this thing gave me anxiety. The propellers on this drone have a slight upward curve at the tip to them, and this thing sat right over top of that. So all I could think was, it's gonna ruin the integrity of the propellers the entire time I had it in storage. So really, those things gave me anxiety that I don't really want to touch on anymore. It was a very dark time in the review process. But the last thing I want to talk about, which is a serious complaint and a serious point that you should be aware of, is an issue that I had with the return to home function on this drone. Now, I was over top of water in an area called Pine Creek. And that's north central Pennsylvania, starting to get up into the mountains of north central Pennsylvania. I had it near a bridge, and the bridge was between myself and the drone. However, the drone I had visual line of sight of, it was probably about 100 yards away from me, if that. So it was close. It should have been well within range. Even with that bridge sort of interrupting the signal, we shouldn't have had any issues because it wasn't a solid piece of metal. It was just, it was like a railroad bridge. That's essentially what it was. I lost signal, okay? That's understandable. I can totally get that. Won't take any points away from Autel because, again, there are a lot of circumstances that might point to that. However, I waited and I waited and I waited. Did not return to home. There was no indication on the controller or the app that it was returning to home. And I started to panic then because, again, this drone is on loan to me. I don't own this drone. I was not gifted this drone. I have to send this back to Autel. So I'm thinking, where the hell's this drone at? And all of a sudden, I'm starting to panic. I'm starting to hyperventilate, really, because I was that upset and nervous. So I get in my car and I drive a little bit closer to the point over the creek that the drone was at to see if I could see it and reestablish connection. I get over there and the drone is nowhere to be found. Nowhere. And so I started to really have a hard time. I was starting to get upset. And then, just by a stroke of luck, I reestablished connection for just a half a second. And that was enough for me to use the Find My Drone function on the Autel Sky app to see where the last location recorded. Previous to that, when I checked the Find My Drone function in the app, it said it was over top of the water, which led me to believe it had crashed into the water. After checking the app, after reconnecting for just a fraction of a second, I did see that it flew back to the starting point, the home point, the original point where I was flying from, and landed. Now, the battery was critically low, and I started out at 100%, but for some reason it went from 100% to about 85%, and then when I lost connection, it was at around 70%. And then all of a sudden, like over the span of 5 or 10 minutes, it was back to like 15% or 10%, or it was super low, is what I'm saying. It drained from 70% down to almost nothing in just 5 or 10 minutes, which was a really weird thing. It was a weird series of events, which leads me to believe there's something not quite right with this particular drone. I did not expect any of that to happen. I thought that was going to be a pretty routine flight, and I went through what was otherwise a temporary nightmare in terms of figuring out what I needed to do when it came to telling Autel that, well, I drowned your drone. Even though that didn't happen, thankfully it did actually return to home and land at the home point. It would have been nice to have gotten some kind of indication from the drone and the controller and the app that it was attempting to return to home, but there was no indication that it was trying to do anything. For all I knew, it either fell in the water or it was still over there hovering over top of the water with no connection to me. So wanted to put that in there. Again, not a big deal, but it was enough to scare me into giving this thing a 7 out of 10 in other and intangibles. A solid performance by the Autel EVO Nano Plus with a final score of 7.7 out of 10. So if you're a professional looking for a professional aerial imaging solution, I don't know that I'd stop at this. I think I would look into Autel's EVO Lite Plus or even potentially the Autel EVO 2 version 3, both really solid professional tools as far as aerial imaging goes. But I would consider this a really nice backup to have. It's inexpensive compared to the other solutions that Autel has, and the camera performance is enough that either recreationally or for hobby, the images are going to be fantastic for like social media or a portfolio. If you're a recreational flyer or a hobbyist or a beginner, this might be the drone for you. Definitely do your research on your own. We didn't cover all of the nuances in this review, just the topics that I felt were the most important to touch on. So definitely do your own research, find out what the best solution is for you. But I would strongly consider this drone as a potential option for you if you are one of those recreational beginners or hobbyists looking for a really nice camera system on an inexpensive and user-friendly drone. So that about does it for our review on the Autel EVO Nano Plus. If you liked this video, hit the thumbs up icon down below. It helps us out a lot. And if you really like drone content, especially content for Part 107 commercial pilots and people considering getting their Part 107 or just learning how to fly drones, the Droning Company is the spot for you. Hit the subscribe button to subscribe to our channel, and make sure you check us out on all social media platforms, usually under the handle @The Droning Company. Also check us out online at thedroningcompany.com. Sign up for a pilot profile if you're Part 107 certified. Start getting jobs as a drone pilot now. You can either go to our job board and check out all of the listings that we have there, or you can use your pilot profile as a quick, fast, and easy pilot portfolio. You can share your work with the various companies and clients that you're trying to attract and get jobs from. The best part is, if you do get a job using the Droning Company's website, they take nothing off the top. It's just a monthly membership fee, but there's no commission, nothing taken off the top. All of the money that you earn using your drone to make money is yours. So until next time, I'm Chris with the Droning Company. Have a good day.